Hey, welcome back. You made it to the final day. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to deal with code blocks, so no more text-based programming. As always, I'm here with my faithful camper, McKinley. McKinley, are you ready for the final day?
Yep.
Are you excited to learn about code blocks instead of text-based programming?
Yes.
Yes, she's had about enough of that text-based programming. It's good for you to learn. I exposed it to you some, but now we're kind of going back to more block-based things. So here's what we're building today. So this is block-based coding, kind of like Scratch or Tinker or something like that. So you're going to drag over code from like a toolbox. So it's somewhere in that regard. But the thing that you're doing with that code is you're building 3D models with it. So the thing that we're going to do first is we're going to build the rocket. So that's the same thing that we built with the 3D modeler on the first day. But now we're going to build it in a totally different way. You can also do like silly little animations and things with it if you would like, right? So that's going to be the first example we do together. And then the next one's going to be a more complex example. We're going to build a trophy, which will be kind of interesting. So you can see it makes kind of a little animation of all the steps we're going to do here. It's actually a pretty complex design, but we're going to do it together. But I thought I'd show you kind of one easy and one complex design. Another thing I'll say about 3D parts, which is fun, is if you have access to a 3D printer, or you would like to order it online, you can actually print your 3D parts. So I have access to a 3D printer, Rolls-Holman, and so I printed this, right? So it's a trophy. It actually says Dave Fisher on here. I doubt you can really see the letters very well. But it's fun to be able to print things, just to kind of know that you can do that. What I actually had to do to print it is I actually had to export this one as a part file, and then I opened it up in the 3D modeler. And then from here, it's pretty easy to export an STL file. That's if you're printing it yourself. Or you can click on 3D print and you can actually like send it to one of these companies, like Print a Thing or something like that, and they will print it for you and then mail it to you. Obviously you have to pay for that service, but just know that that's something you could do if you wanted. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So go to Tinkercad dashboard and go down to Codeblocks. My guess is that you don't have any code blocks in yours. I've got a few in mind. So go ahead and click on Create New Code Block. And like all Tinkercad tools, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to open up your new project, which will be blank. It's got the new design as well here. And it's going to give it some crazy name, right? So we're used to the crazy name game. And so let's go ahead and fix the crazy name to start things off. I don't even understand the name that I got today. So this is my rocket. And if I wanted to, I could put in like day 5 rocket. So here's how Codeblocks works. Just like Scratch or Tinker, there's commands over on the right. There's different categories for commands. You can see there's shapes, there's modify, there's control, there's math, there's data, there's markup. And then there's the area for your code, kind of like your workspace. And then there's the stage over here. This is like, your actors performing their job. So let's go ahead and start off with a cylinder. So go ahead and drag a cylinder from the command palette and drop it into your code and go ahead and hit play just to see what happens. So what happens is this. Your code says add cylinder. This cylinder is orange, but if you change your code, let's say we wanted it to be a silver cylinder, I could change my code and now it's a silver cylinder. You could also expand this out and you could change the properties of it. So let's say I wanted a height of 40 for my rocket. And if I changed the height to be 40, you can see that the cylinder is now taller. You could play with different numbers if you wanted. Play around to your heart's content with changing the radius and the height and things like that. Number of sides won't really be a big impact. You can see that a cylinder is an approximation, so it's got 20 sides on it, so it's not really a perfect circle. That's just how CAD programs work. But you can play with radius and heights to your heart content. Now you'll notice that what it did is it put this cylinder right at the middle, so its middle is at 0, 0, 0. So this red line right here, this is the x-axis. This green line right here, this is the y-axis. And this blue line right here, this is the z-axis. And it put the middle of the part right at 0, 0, 0. So what I want to do for my rocket is I want to move it up. That's a command that's in modify. So it kind of makes sense that shapes is where you add new things. and then modify is how you modify them. Since it put this thing right in the middle and it's 40 tall, I want to move it up 20 in the Z direction. So if I run it now, you can see that it makes my cylinder and then it moves it up 20. Cool. So let's go ahead and do some more stuff. By the way, the zoom features over here, this is the same as it was from the first day. You can hold down the right mouse button to kind of rotate around. If you have a mouse, you can hold down the scroll wheel to kind of pan around, and you can also zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. I do recommend a mouse for this because it's not 3D modeling, but it's close. All right, let's go ahead and add the cone next. So we'll kind of get used to this pattern, but if we want to add an object, that's a command that's up in shapes. So I'm going to add a cone. There's no harm in just running it to see what it does. You can see that it put the cone on down there. I want a different color cone. You can pick any color you'd like. I think I'm going to go with red. The height and the radius of the cone, I'm actually okay with. So I think I'm just going to leave those alone. But I do want it to be red. And then I do want to modify it to where I move it up some. So it's 20 tall, so it must be at -10, like the bottom of it's got to be down at -10. So I want to move it up 10. There is sometimes a little bug with that. Oh, and that, so what did I do wrong, McKinley? I moved it up 10, but what should I have done?
You should have moved it up all the way to the top of the cylinder.
Yeah, I should have moved it up all the way to the top of the cylinder. 10 wasn't enough. I actually want to do 10 plus the height of the cylinder. So 10 plus 40, I won't even bother asking McKinley. She knows she can do that. 50. Cool, and there I have a little cone on top. All right, let's add the fins. So we're cruising along in the easy one. So the fins are a star is what we put on. Just like 3D modeling, there's two different stars. There's this yellow star, which has to be 5-sided, can't be anything but 5-sided. And it has to kind of look like the picture there. The one we want is this blue star because it's got all kinds of like bells and whistles and features and things you can change. One thing you can change about it is, of course, the color. I feel like making nice orange fins. Pick any color you'd like. But one nice thing about this one is it defaults to 5 sides. So you can kind of see that's what it looks like with 5 sides. But I choose to have my rocket with 4 sides. So I'm going to make a 4-sided object. Now there's other things that I'd like to fix. It looks like my fins are kind of too fat, right? So they're just a little too fat in the middle. That's the inner radius percentage. Instead of 0.05, or sorry, instead of 0.5, I'm going to use something smaller. There's no magic answer here. I'm going to use 0.15. So that'll kind of look more like fins. So that's good. I also want them to be quite a bit taller. Right now their height is 10. I'm going to make their height be 40. So I run it. And so now their height is 40. Cool. And so it's going pretty good. What I need to do next is I need to move it up into position. And I think this is the one that has the weird little bug as far as the height. I'll just try it and see what happens. So to move this up into position, what I want to do is its height is 40. So it should be a movement up of 20. I'm not sure if that works or not, though. So I try it here. Yeah, isn't that a weird little bug? It moved it too tall. I don't know what to say about that. Maybe it'll be fixed by the time you get to it, and that'll be great. But it moved it 5 too much, so I only want to move it 15. Sometimes in programming, I can make sense of why things happen. Sometimes I just change it to do what I want, right? But there is a pretty cool little rocket. So we did that quickly, but the nice thing about block-based coding is you can just see my code, right? So it's just sitting right here. And so you can keep messing with yours until you make it look like mine. So that's kind of the end of the rocket, but we're going to do a couple extra things with it just to kind of show you some things. So here's what we're going to do first. All these parts are really kind of part of a group, right? And so you'll notice that whenever I say move, it just applies to the last shape. But if I wanted to do something that applied to all of the shapes, I could make them into a group. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on Create Group, and I'm going to put it on here. Normally, Create Group, like in regular 3D modeling, would make them all the same color, but the default in blocks is to make them multicolor. So that makes them a group. Now that doesn't appear to have done anything at all, but it did. And here's what it did. Now, if I do modify commands, it's going to apply to the whole group together. So just for fun, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a loop that repeats 4 times. And my goal is to make this rocket kind of appear to blast off, right? So that'd be kind of neat. And so here's what I want to do. I want to rotate. And since I created a group, it's going to rotate my whole rocket. I'm going to rotate about the x-axis, which is right here. And I'm going to do 4 rotations that are all 180 degrees. So that should basically be 2 flips. So we're not done yet, but go ahead and run it and see what happens. It builds my rocket, and then it spins at 180, spins at 180, spins at 180, spins at 180. It's kind of interesting. Also, I'll mention that you'll notice that mine runs at a certain speed. That is based on my computer. Yours might run slower. If yours runs slower, I recommend you crank up the speed to try to get it as fast as you can. You see, if I crank up the speed, it goes too fast. But some computers do run faster or slower. All right, so it's almost done. It doesn't look like it's blasting off right now, though. It just looks like it's like spinning in place. In order to make it look like it's blasting off, what I want to do is instead of rotating about the middle right here, I want to rotate about some point down here. And then that way it'll kind of look like it's kind of blasting off in kind of like an arc. And then it'll go out of view. And then it'll come back again. So it can blast off a second time. So what we want to do is we want to change the pivot point of this rotate about command. And I want to make the pivot point be somewhere like down here. So somewhere down here is this green line is the y direction. So this is down to like negative, like, I don't know, negative 150 in the y. That's where I want to rotate around. So I want to drop something into this little circle that says from pivot. That's going to be in math. And here you can find there's an XYZ command in math. And I want to rotate around negative 150. And so now if I run it, it's going to build my rocket. And so then it's going to blast it off, and it's going to kind of loop around. And so depending on your vantage, it'll look like a good blast off or not. Oh, another thing I should mention, McKinley just had this bug. She had her speed all the way up, and with your speed all the way up, you won't see an animation regardless of your computer speed. So make sure you put it to the middle so that you can see the animation. Even if your computer's slow, it'll only play the animation that way. Another thing you can do, which is fun, this again depends on your computer speed. You can click on share. So I clicked on share there, I did it kind of fast. But you can export this as an animated GIF file. I don't know what you know about GIF files, but they're files that are actually multiple images in them. And you can download an animated GIF file. It takes a little bit to finish. But once you've got that file, you can like email that to other people, and it should kind of show the animation in that GIF file. I'll wait for mine to finish here. All right, so mine finished creating the GIF file, and I downloaded it here. Now what you could do if you wanted is you could like email this GIF file to someone, and it'd be kind of fun. So I took that GIF file and I dropped it into this email message. And what a GIF file will do, so I just sent it to McKinley here. What a GIF file should do is it should kind of play an animation to somebody that you emailed it to, which is kind of neat, right? All right, back to the goal. But exporting can be fun. You can also export it as a part, and then you can open it over in the 3D modeler, which is fun. That's how you can get things printed as well. All right, so let's go and open up a new project. So that was the easy one. Now here comes the hard one, right? So I thought we'd just do one hard one together. I thought it'd be fun to do a trophy. It's your last day of coding camp, so this is it. You're making your own trophy, right? So we don't give you a trophy. You're just going to make your own. But go ahead and say new design and get yourself set up with a new design. As always, there's a crazy name up here. So this is my final trophy. And so what I've done with this trophy is I've kind of figured out all the dimensions in advance. So I've kind of got my notes here. So we're going to cheat, and we're going to use some of my dimensions that I kind of figured out in advance. But the way you develop these things is little by little, right? So you try a number, you see how that looks. So you sketch out on paper what you think it's going to be, and then you try it. And it's this iterative process of like getting better and better and better. But we're going to kind of jump to the final answer just to kind of keep the video moving. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I want to do first is I want to make this top cup. So it's like a cup that sits on top here. The part that's going to help me the most with that is a paraboloid. So I'm going to start by bringing over a paraboloid. This paraboloid, I choose to make it kind of a gold color. You can make it any color you'd like. And I want it to have a radius of 40 and a height also of 40. Now, if you run it right now, it'll make your paraboloid, so you can look at it. It's kind of pretty on there. It's upside down, and it's too low. So I need to rotate it. So let's go ahead and click on rotate here. I'm going to choose to rotate it about the x-axis. That's this red line. And I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. So now it's facing the correct direction. The next thing it is it's too low for me, so I'm going to move it up. I know that this is kind of a weird number, but I'm going to move it up 65. So what that did is, by being up 65, it made the top of this thing be at 85. So the height is 40, half of 40 is 20, 20 plus 65 is 85. So that's where it's at right now. So that's going good. It's kind of a little higher. The next problem is it's not actually a cup, right? It's just like a solid thing. So what I want to do is I want to cut out the middle to make it a cup. Well, the way you can do that is to add another paraboloid, except for instead of like setting a solid color, click on this button right here which says to make it a hole. So this is going to make a cutout, which would be kind of neat. Now I want it to be a little smaller than the original paraboloid. I'm going to make its radius 35 and its height 30. I know it seems like I made that one 5 less and that one 10 less, but really the diameter is 80 over here, and the diameter here is 70, so it's 10 less in diameter. And then the height goes from 40 to 30. Now it also is going to be upside down. I could run it, but I know that that's going to be a problem, so I'm going to have to flip it over. What the heck, I will run it here just so you can see it. And then it's also at the same, or also at the wrong height. So we need to move it up so that its top is also up here at 85. Now to get it to 85, it has a height of 30, so we're going to need to bring it up 55. Is that right? No, it has a height of 30, which half of that is 15. So to get it to 85, we're going to have to move it up 70. And again, the first time I did this, I didn't get it right the first time. I messed it up who knows how many times. But you can play with these numbers. That's the fun thing about Codeblocks. You play with them and you see what it does. And you play with them and you see what it does. Cool. All right, next up, I want to actually cut out this hole. In order to actually cut out that hole, it's the same as we did with 3D modeling. You create them as a group. So I'm going to go ahead and run them here. And then as soon as I say create group, that actually kind of like cuts out my hole. So now I have a cup, which is pretty cool. Next thing I want to do is I want to have a stem that's kind of below the cup. So this is going to be my cylinder for the stem here. So let's go ahead and see if we can make a cylinder stem. So I find a cylinder. And I choose to make it a gold color as well. Again, you can make it any color you'd like. And my stem that I'm going to make, I'm going to have a height of 40. That's kind of what I use for my rocket. I kind of like 40 tall things. Now I'm going to need to move it up to position as well. And the thing that makes it kind of come to the bottom and look good is a move of 30. So if I run that, and so that'll kind of like connect it to the bottom. And again, it was just a guess and check until I figured out that 30 was a good height. Now it's off the ground some amount. It had a height of 40, so that half of that is 20. And then we moved it up 30, so it's actually up above the ground by 10 right now. So the next thing that I put, if I want to butt it up to the bottom of that, I need to get it to 10. All right, so I want to make this block right here, butt up to the bottom of that. In my brain, this is like a wooden block, so I'm going to make it kind of a wooden color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rectangle box. This box I'm going to make kind of a wooden color, so kind of pick a brown. Again, you can pick a brown or you pick whatever you want. And this thing I'm going to make 90 wide, 30 in length, and 10 in the height. So it's going to be 10 tall, so it's going to fill that gap perfectly. Now, if it's 10 tall, I do have to move it up 5, just so that it kind of comes up to ground level. By the way, I wish that they had just made when you put a block on that its bottom was at 0, but they did it different. Maybe they'll change their mind someday. But you can see that there I've got like a little block. So now I have the top part of my trophy, and it's going pretty good. Now, this trophy is not the finished product, so I want to take this whole thing and move it up. Now, as you can see here, that if I put on a move command now, it's just going to move the last shape, right? That's how it works. Each of these shapes is kind of like a divider. So what I've got to do, if I want to move the whole thing up 100, I've got to make it a group. So I'm going to create a group now. And now that basically says, hey, everything above me is a group. And I'm going to move the whole darn thing up 100. And this is just an amount so that it'll make room for the rest of my trophy, which is coming below. So there the whole thing moves up. Cool, so now I've got room for the middle of my trophy, the bottom wooden plaque, and then my name that's going to go on it as well. Now I think of this as like a pretty isolated chunk. But whenever you work in bigger projects, it's kind of nice to keep your isolated chunks separate. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab this create new object. I kind of grabbed 2 of them there on accident. Just a second. Let me get rid of that one. I'm going to say create new object, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it top. Now, what does that really do? It does a couple things. It makes this whole object be called top, which is kind of nice. And if I ever wanted to duplicate it, I could do something like that. Sometimes with Codeblocks, you can duplicate things easily. But really what I want to do is I just want to make this like a single chunk of code so that I can start working on something different now, and I won't get messed up by the code that was in here. So this next section, I'm going to start with a create new object. And I'm just going to call this one middle. And these blocks kind of help keep things isolated as well, right? So now I don't have to worry about interference between that top section and the middle section. So for the middle section, what I want to do is I want 2 cylinders and a bottom rectangle. That's going to be kind of like my middle section. So let's go ahead and do a cylinder. And just like before, I kind of like thinking of these as gold. This cylinder is going to have a height of 80. And then I'm going to move it up into position, but I'm also going to move it over. So the value that I'm going to move this one is -30. Oops, that's not -30. -30 in the X, that moves it over to the side, and then 60 in the Z. Cool, so I'll go ahead and watch my animation. Now you'll notice that I do have to kind of wait for my whole animation to finish. If you ever get sick of watching your animation, feel free to crank the speed all the way up, and then depending on your computer, it'll build it at a faster speed with no animation effect. All right, see if you can pause the video and look at the pattern we use for this cylinder and make the cylinder for the other side. All right, let's go ahead and do the wooden block that's on the bottom. So we need a box, and I think of it as wood. And this one is 120 wide, 30, it calls it length, but I think of it as kind of like the depth. And then the height on this one, we are going to use 20. And then I'll have to move that into position as well. Since it's 20 tall, I'm going to move it up 10. By the way, if you get sick of the time needed to do things, what you can do is you can actually change the order of your code if you want. So for example, I'm just showing a demo here. For example, if this code is before that one, it'll show that one first, right? And so if yours is running slow and it's kind of annoying, you could always do the thing you care about most first, and then put the other stuff later, and then you can just pause it if you don't want to see the later stuff, right? Mine is still running sufficiently fast, so I don't have a need to worry about it. So I'll reset it here. And so if I wanted to, I can just crank up my speed here and it just gets done. Great, so that's the middle section. Now that middle section is done, I always kind of like to, this is just personal preference, I always kind of like to end these create new objects with a create group at the bottom. I just kind of like to do it that way. So now that section is like all together. All right, so the only thing we have left is the tricky bit. So this front nameplate. So I want it to say your name, and then I want it to have kind of like a gold plaque, like plate look to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some text, and then we're going to also add like a gold plate to it. Now for this one, I will go ahead and put it at the very top of my code, just so that happens first. And I'm going to give it a name. So this is my nameplate. You can spell the name however you want it. I kind of did it in a weird style there. That's how I name my variables when I code, so I kind of did it that way. Name it whatever you want. And the nice thing about it being at the top is that as I add things, so first I'm going to add some text. And my text is going to say Dave Fisher. But since this is the very first thing in my program, what I can do is I can actually just use this step-by-step button. And every time I click this step-by-step button, it does just one line of code. So that's another way that you can develop big projects with Codeblock, right? So it did just that one step. And then whenever I want to run it again, I just reset it, and I just step through kind of one by one. So what I want to do first is I want my lettering to be black. So I'm going to reset it and run through just 2 steps. Now you'll notice that there's not many options on text. There's how high do you want it? So that's the height here. That's the only thing you can really adjust. I'm going to make mine be a height of 2. So that way it's relatively flat. It's not completely flat like ink would be, so that if you do 3D print it, you can actually see like some bump out there. Now I also want to shrink it down a little bit. My name is such that the amount I need to shrink mine is 0.65. I've done this before, and I know that 0.65 in the X, 0.65 in the Y, and then there's no need to shrink the Z direction. That's the height, so that it's fine. I happen to know that that fits pretty well. Now, if your name is longer, oops, I didn't mean to hit. If your name is longer, you might need to shrink it down more. So for example, my daughter's name, McKinley Fisher, is just a little bit longer than mine. She's got to shrink hers more. I've played with hers as well, and hers works pretty well at 0.5, 0.5. So think about your name. Think about if it's longer than Dave Fisher. If it's roughly the length of McKinley Fisher, you'll need about that. If it's shorter than Dave Fisher, maybe you can make it a little bigger. Don't go too much bigger than like 0.7 or else it's going to go badly. But that's a good start. I'll just go ahead and leave it in as McKinley Fisher. I kind of like seeing her name on there. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to put a rectangle below it, right? So I kind of want to put like a backing plane so that it kind of looks good. So what I'm going to do for this backing plane is I'm going to make it related to this block down here. So this block down here is 120 wide and 20 tall. So the nameplate has to be a little bit less than 120 and a little bit less in the height than 20. I'm going to come down 2 pixels on all sides. So I'm going to go with 118 and then 18. Maybe it's easier for me to just do than to describe verbally. So I'm going to make a block. This is going to be a gold nameplate. Just for giggles, I'm going to use like a brighter gold. And this nameplate needs to have a height and a width to it. And its width is going to be 118. So that way it's 2 pixels less, 1 on each side, than the piece of wood. And then its length is going to be 18. And then its height is going to be 1. So those numbers seem kind of crazy. But what they do is they give you a block that's kind of like a nameplate that's roughly the right size. So when you put this nameplate on, now you'll know if your name fits or not. So it looks like McKinley Fisher fits pretty good. But obviously if your name doesn't fit, now is the time to fix that scale. So let's take a look at what we got here. So if I rotate this around, I can see, like if I zoom like crazy, zoom in, right? I can see that what I've got here is I've got a name which is too tall. And then I've got a name block that's 1 tall. And so there's a little bit sticking out on this side and a little bit sticking out on that side. I don't really want a little bit sticking out on each side. So I'm going to move that name block down just a little bit. So I'm going to move it down exactly 1 millimeter. So my Z is going to be -1. And so now it's getting to be more steps. So now it creates the name, it shrinks it down, it creates the block here, and then here is the move down, right? So it moves it down 1 pixel. And so now that lettering is all perfectly on the top, right? Cool. So it's going pretty good. So at this point, I've got a name block. Now what I want to do is I want to kind of like rotate it up and move it forwards to the front of the trophy. Since I want them to move together, the name and the backing piece, I need to group them. So I'm going to create group. I can see McKinley's struggling over here because their computer's slow, but I'll help you out with this. So once I group them, that's all well and good. Then I need to rotate them to kind of like flip them up. I'm going to rotate them about this red line here, which is the x-axis, by 90 degrees. So I'm going to see what that looks like. I'm going to keep using my single step approach, even though it's getting kind of long. It's like I had to click a whole bunch to go through create group. There's the rotate. So now it is rotated up. So it's actually like almost ready to go. The only thing that's wrong is I need to move it up some and forward some, because right now it's in the middle of my other trophy. So this should hopefully be the last thing I need to do. I need to move it forwards in the Y. So the Y is this green line here. So if I want to move it forwards in the Y, that's actually the negative Y direction. And I'm going to move it -16. The reason for the -16 is because that wooden block was 30. Half of 30 is 15. And then it has a little bit of thickness as well, so I needed to bump it out to -16. I also need to move it up in the Z direction, because you can see it's kind of like partly below ground. And I need to move it up 10 so that it's in the middle of that block. So now what I can do is I can run my whole thing, right? So it makes my name, makes the plate for it, it rotates it up, it moves it into position, and then it starts creating the rest of the trophy. It's going pretty good. And then the block is on there. Awesome. Now, for your animation, if you want your animation to happen in a different order, you totally can. You can do it in any order you would like, to be perfectly honest. So if you want this to happen later, you can just very carefully move it later in the code. You can move it to the middle if you wanted, right? Doesn't really matter. But if I run it now, you can see it does the top thing first. And then after the top thing is done, then it's going to do my nameplate second, just showing that you can do whatever order you want. And then it's going to do the plaques and the blocks third. Pretty cool. Would this have been easier to do with the 3D modeler than blocks? I don't know. It's really just kind of an opportunity to learn how to use coding to do 3D models. From here, what you can do is you can export it. If you had a 3D printer, you could get an STL file and you could print it. Or if you wanted, you could export it as a part, and then you could just save the part to where you could edit it somewhere else, right? McKinley trophy. So I'm going to save that part. Now, I could also share it, so I could make an animated GIF of it or a screenshot. Those are some things you could do. If you did choose to save it as a part, what you could do is you could, now you could open it in the regular 3D modeler if you wanted to go that route. So I'm going to go ahead and show that step just for fun. So in 3D Designs, I say create new part. And what I'm going to do is I now have that part in my library. So it's called my part collection, right? So here's McKinley's trophy that I made in Codeblocks. Let me just go ahead and drag it over, drop it right there. Cool, and then once it's in here, you could do more things in here if you wanted. So you can kind of go back and forth between these things. And then from over here, you could actually like get it 3D printed through one of these communities. I haven't ever done one of these because I don't need to. I've got access to a 3D printer. but know that you can, right? All right, so I finished the rest of that kind of quick. McKinley, I know you fell behind a little bit. Do you want to show the work that you've got so far?
No, I finished.
Oh, you finished? You were able to keep up with that torrent pace? Let's see it. So we'll see the speed of McKinley's computer here. So she's got it set to maximum speed. This is what happens when your dad gives you a 10-year-old computer, right? It's looking great. You got the base on there. And then right now it's doing the McKinley Fisher stuff. And then it's going to pop right to the front here in just a second, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
3, 2, 1, boom. Cool. How do you like Codeblocks?
I like it a lot better.
Cool. Did you
The
text-based programming? Yeah, text-based programming is hard. Did you enjoy your code camp this week?
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you as well for joining us today. It's been great having you. Hopefully you've enjoyed the camp. We'll see you some other time. All right. Bye.